Okay, we are going to do 8.4, solving quadratics by factoring. Last week we were solving quadratics by graphing, and we were putting the quadratic formula into the calculator and looking for the solutions, which were where the quadratic crossed the x-axis. And there was two solutions if it crossed twice, one solution if it changed direction right on the x-axis, or no solution if it never even met the x-axis. So what we're going to do today is basically we were solving those equations by finding those points where x was equal to something and y was equal to 0. So we're going to do the same thing by factoring. And since we've already done factoring, all we're doing is taking those two little binomials, setting them equal to 0, and solving for x, which should be totally easy. Here's what I want you to think about before we start. If I have 2x equals 0, then x is equal to 0, because when I divide by 2, x equals 0. So if I want my x, we're setting y equal to 0, because when y is 0, x is on the x-axis. So when I take my quadratic, and it would be something like x times x minus 3 equals 0, I have two possible solutions for x. X could be 0, and then anything I multiply times 0 is going to be 0. Or x minus 3 could be equal to 0, which would then mean I multiply times something that's 0, and I'm going to get 0. So if I do that and solve for x, x is equal to 3. So I have two possible answers for x. It could either be 0 or it could be 3. And either way, part of my equation ends up being equal to 0, which means the whole thing is equal to 0. So keep that kind of thought in mind, and let's look at number 1. It's already been factored. So all we're doing is looking at our x values. I either need 2x minus 3 to be equal to 0, or I need 5x minus 8 to be equal to 0. Once one of those is equal to 0 and I'm multiplying, my whole equation is equal to 0, which is what I want. So if I'm going to solve for x, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. 2x is equal to 3. I'm going to divide both sides by 2. X is equal to 3 over 2. Or I can add 8 on both sides. I could have 5x equals 8 divided by 5. X equals 8 over 5. So these are my two values of x that if I substituted them back into that equation, it would come out to be 0, which is what I want. So those are the two places on the x-axis where my parabola would go across the x-axis. Those are my two solutions. If you have if you have a number in front of the x, which means that your x squared has a number besides 1, you're going to end up with a fraction. So you're probably going to see a lot of fractions, but it's not a big deal. We're just leaving them like that because we're just finding the solutions. So let's look at number 2 and go through our factoring steps. The first thing I do is look for a greatest common factor. There isn't a greatest common factor, so I move on to the next step, which is my sum is 13, my product is 36. I look for all the factors of 36, so I have 6 and 6, 9 and 4, 12 and 3. 9 and 4 adds up to 13, so those are my two factors, or my factors of 36. So I'm going to draw my box. I'm going to put x squared in the top one. I'm going to put 36 in the bottom right. Instead of 13x, I'm going to put in a 9x and a 4x. I'm going to look across my top row, and the greatest common factor is x. I'm going to look across the bottom row. My greatest common factor is 4. I'm going to look on the left-hand column. My greatest common factor is x. And the right-hand column, my greatest common factor is 9. So what I end up with is x plus 4 times x plus 9 equals 0. So I can either have x plus 4 equals 0 or x plus 9 equals 0. And if x plus 4 equals 0, x is equal to negative 4, or x is equal to negative 9. So those are my two solutions. Those would be the 2 points on the x-axis where my parabola would cross. And that's my solution to the quadratic equation x squared plus 13x plus 36 equals 0. Okay, let's look at number 3. At some point, I hope you would pause the video and try and work out some of these problems and see if they're not as easy as you think they are. Okay, number 3 is already set up for us. There is no greatest common factor to take out. My sum is negative 3. My product is negative 10. I have 5 and 2. That's about it, 10 and 1. Since my sum is negative, if I have a negative 5 and a positive 2, that will multiply to negative 10 and add to negative 3. So if I were going to do my 4 term, I would have x squared, and instead of my minus 3x, I would write minus 5x plus 2x minus 10. I'm going to take the greatest common factor of 2x plus 10, which is 2, and I end up with x minus 5. And on my left-hand side, my greatest common factor is x. I also end up with x minus 5. So one of my factors is x plus 2. The other one is x minus 5 equals 0. So I either have x plus 2 equals 0, which would mean x equals negative 2, or I would have x minus 5 equals 0, which would mean x is equal to positive 5. So x equals positive 5 and x equals negative 2 are my two solutions. It's the place where the parabola crosses the x-axis, and it's my roots. On number 4, we have a greatest common factor. And so I'm going to divide everything by 9. When I do that, I end up with x squared minus 9 equals 0. It's the difference of two squares. Notice that there's a minus sign. There's a perfect square on either side. So I know that I'm going to square root my x, square root my 9. And because there's nothing in the middle, one has to be a minus and one has to be a plus. So here's my factored equation. And I don't really care about the 9 because I'm trying to get it equal to 0. If I have either one of my parentheses add up to 0, then when I multiply it times 9, I'm still sitting at an equation equal to 0. So x minus 3 equals 0, or x plus 3 equals 0, which means x is equal to 3, or x is equal to negative 3. So those are my two answers. Number 5 and number 6 are not solved and set equal to 0. So I'm going to add 17x to both sides, so I end up with 6x squared plus 17x plus 5. There is no greatest common factor to factor out, so I'm going to have a sum of 17 and a product of 30. My factors are 6 and 5. Everything's positive, so I'm only looking at positive numbers pretty much. 15 and 2, which happens to be what multiplies or adds up to 17. So here's another one of those equations with the leading number is 6. So when we solve for our x's, we're going to end up with fractions. 6x squared goes in the top left, 5 goes in the bottom right. I'm replacing my 17 with a 15x and a 2x. Greatest common factor on the top is 3x. Greatest common factor on the bottom is 1. Greatest common factor on the left column is 2x, and on the right column it is 5. So I have 3x plus 1 times 2x plus 5 equals 0. So either 3x plus 1 equals 0 or 2x plus 5 equals 0. Solve for x, I end up with 3x equals -1, x equals -1/3. For my other x value, 2x equals -5, x equals -5/2. Here's my two values for x. That would make my equation come out true, and my roots for my quadratic equation. Number 6. Before I do anything, I'm going to go ahead and multiply the whole thing by 12. That gets rid of my fractions, my denominators, and is going to make my problem easier to work with. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and I end up with x squared minus 12 times 2 is 24 divided by 3 is 8, so minus 8x equals 48. Move my 48 over, x squared minus 8x. Oh, 12, nope. I'm good. Minus 48 equals 0. So I have no greatest common factor. My sum is -8. My product is -48. I have 6 and 8. I have 4 and 12. It's a negative, so I'm thinking 12 and 4. If my 12 were negative and my 4 were positive, that would add to -8. So I'm going to change I'm going to blow up my b. I'm going to change my 3 terms to 4 terms. I'm going to have x squared minus 12x plus 4x minus 48. Greatest common factor on the right side is 4, which gives me x minus 12. Greatest common factor on the left is x, which gives me x minus 12. So my 2, can't believe I ran out of all that room. Okay, so I either have x minus 12 equals 0, which means x equals 12. Okay, x minus 12 equals 0, x equals 12, or x plus 4 equals 0, which would be x equals -4. So here's my two values of x for number 6. We're going to work backwards. Here's the answers for the quadratic equations in 7, 8, 9, and 10. And we're going to take those and work backwards until we come up with our trinomial. So remember what we just were doing. If I have x like this, that means x equals -2 or x equals 5. So I'm going to just think about what we did over here on the right side. This is what I'm starting with. The first thing I did was set it equal to 0. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. Okay, now I've got my two factors that are equal to 0. I'm going to multiply them together. So I'm going to do x plus 2 times x minus 5 equals x squared plus 2x minus 5x minus 10, which is x squared minus 3x minus 10. Did we just have that one? I don't think we did. Yep, number 3. We had -2 and +5, and there they are. Okay, so if we have our roots, we can go back to the quadratic equation. So it works out both ways. Okay, number 8. X plus 4 equals 0. Nope. X equals 4. X equals 7. It's getting ahead of myself there. X minus 4 equals 0. X minus 7 equals 0. I'm going to multiply these two guys together, and I'm going to have x squared minus 4x minus 7x plus 28. And that's going to be x squared minus 11x plus 28. So, working backwards from my roots, I can find my quadratic equation. Number 9. Number 9 and number 10 have fractions. So that means when I end up with my quadratic, my trinomial, my leading x squared, my leading coefficient is not going to be 1, because for one of these, I'm going to have to multiply x times something. So let's just see how that works out. X equals -3, x equals 5 over 2. For this one, I'm adding 3 to both sides, so I end up with x plus 3 equals 0. For my second one, I'm multiplying both sides by 2. So I end up with 2x equals 5. Subtract 5 from both sides. I have 2x minus 5 equals 0. I'm going to multiply these two guys together. 2x squared plus 6x minus 5x minus 15 equals 0. And notice I keep forgetting to put these equal to 0, but same thing. 2x squared plus x minus 15 equals 0. And like I said, my leading coefficient is not 1. All right, last one. X equals -4/5. X equals 7. I'm going to multiply both sides by 5, so I have 5x equals -4. 5x plus 4 equals 0. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. X minus 7 equals 0. I'm multiplying these two guys together. 5x squared plus 4x minus 35x minus 28. 5x squared minus 31x minus 28. Alrighty, there you go. So now you can go backwards from factors from your roots to your quadratic equation, and you can go from a quadratic equation and find the roots, what x is equal to. Number 11, I am not going to do those algebraic tiles. We're just going to solve it by factoring, just like we've been doing. So I'm going to solve for, it's up here at the top. I don't know why they did that. I'm going to have 2x squared minus x minus 6. My sum is 12. My sum is -1. My product is -12. So I can have 4 and 3. How about -4, +3 makes a -1. So I've got my box. 2x squared goes in the top left. Minus 6 goes in the bottom right. I replace my -x with minus 4x plus 3x. Greatest common factor in the top row is 2x. Greatest common factor in the bottom row is 3. Greatest common factor in the left column is x. Greatest common factor in the right column is -2. So I end up with 2x plus 3 times x minus 2. One of those has to be equal to 0. So I'll do the easy one for x minus 2 equals 0, which would be x equals 2. Or 2x plus 3 equals 0. Subtract 3 from both sides. Divide by 2. X equals 2 or x equals -3 over 2. These are my two solutions. Number 12, all we're doing is solving for making it equal to 0. So I'm going to have 2x squared plus 6x plus 18 equals 0. Common factor, divide out a 2. X squared plus 3x equals, plus 9 equals 0. My sum is 3 and my product is 9. Factors of 9 are 3 and 3 and 9 and 1. None of those add up to 3. So there is no solution because there's no factors. No factors, no magic numbers, no solution. And if you want, go ahead and graph that on your calculator and look at it and see that it in fact does not go as low as the x-axis and it doesn't ever cross. Okay, 13 is kind of confusing. I had to look at that for a few minutes. If you notice that x squared and y squared are both perfect squares and there's a difference, this is not the way we worked our other problems. But if I have x squared minus y squared equals 10, so I added 10 to both sides, it's kind of equal to 0, then I could do square root my x, square root my y, one's minus and one's plus, and that's equal to 10. And then you look at this and go, ooh, x plus y equals 5. That means I can substitute that in right there. They made it look all hard, but really it's not because there's my x plus y. So I have x minus y times 5 equals 10. And if I divide both sides by 5, I have x minus y equals 2. I was thinking we were going to have to substitute and do all this, figure out x and then y, and we don't, because that was so easy. Okay, number 14. I gave myself all kinds of room on this on my last 2 tries on doing this worksheet, and now I got no room. Okay, here's my rectangle. My length and my width. My length is 4 meters longer than my width. So my width is W, my length is W plus 4. If the area of the park is 96, that means 96 equals W times W plus 4. I'm going to multiply that out, so I have 96. I'm going to flip it around. W squared plus 4W equals 96. Taking 96 away from both sides. W squared plus 4W minus 96 equals 0. I have no greatest common factor. My sum is 4, and my product is negative 96. And if I look at negative 96, I have 8 times 12. So my 12 is positive and my 8 is negative. So in my box, I have W squared and minus 96 minus 8W plus 12W. My greatest common factor on the top row is W. My greatest common factor on the bottom row is 12. My greatest common factor on the left column is W. And my greatest common factor on the right column is negative 8. So I end up with W minus 8 equals 0, or W plus 12 equals 0. So W is either 8 or W is equal to negative 12. Now we're talking about a park. Can we have a negative length? I say no. So we're crossing out the negative 12, and W equals 8 is really our only answer that makes sense. So if W is equal to 8, then the width is 8, and the length is 12, which is what they asked us to find. So 12 would be the answer. So sometimes when you're working these out, you have a solution that doesn't make any sense, if we're talking about something like a rectangle. So that made it easier because we just had one answer that really fit. Okay, here we go with another rectangle. This one is 3 by 10. So the area is 30. We're going to add the same amount to both sides, and the area is going to double. So we have 10 plus x and 3 plus x because it's the same amount, and it's going to be equal to 60. So 10 plus x times 3 plus x equals 60. I'm going to multiply those together and switch it all around. X squared plus 3x plus 10x blah, 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 plus 30 equals 60. So I have x squared plus 13x. I'm going to subtract 60 from both sides, so I end up with minus 30 equals 0. Sum is 13, and the product is negative 30. Factors of negative 30 are going to be 10 and 3, and the 10 is positive and the 3 is negative. So in my box, see how I don't have any room? X squared minus 30 plus 10x minus 3x. Greatest common factor on the top is x. Greatest common factor on the bottom row is negative 3. Greatest common factor in the left column is x. Greatest common factor in the right column is 10. So I have x minus 3. Do it over here. X minus 3 equals 0, which means x equals 3. Or x plus 10 equals 0, which would be x equals negative 10. I did not add negative 10 meters to my garden. So my answer is going to be 3. So my dimensions are going to be, if x equals 3, my new length is going to be 6 and 13, which is not correct because 6 times 13 is not 60. What did I do wrong? 10 and 3, 30. Factor plus 10 minus 3. Oh, I hate it when I do this. I had the answer on my paper and everything, and that was not it. Because it's not 10 and 3. Yeah, it is. No, it's not. Huh. Maybe I did this wrong. Plus 3x plus 10x is 13x. 30 minus 30. 10 and 3 minus 10. No, plus 10 minus 3. X minus 3x plus 10. What did I do wrong? Okay, I'll come back to that one in a second. Because I did something wrong. I just don't know what I did. All right, last one. Okay, so we're talking about a diver. Meow, diving into the water. Here's our quadratic. Remember, we want the diver reaches the water, h equals 0. So I have negative 16t squared plus 8t plus 48 equals 0. I'm going to divide everything by negative 8. So I have 2t squared minus t minus 6 equals 0. So my sum is negative 1. My product is negative 12. 4 times 3, so it's going to be negative 4, positive 3. So I have 2t squared and negative 6 and negative 4x and positive 3x, or t, sorry. Greatest common factor on top is 2t. Greatest common factor on the bottom row is 3. Greatest common factor on the left column is t. Greatest common factor on the right column is -2. So I have t minus 2 or equals 0, which is t equals 2, or 2t plus 3 equals 0, which is going to be a negative. -3/2. So that cannot be our answer. So our answer must be t equals 2. So it takes him 2 seconds from when he dives to when he hits the water. So if you're done with this, you can stop watching, but I'm going back to number 15. So I have 10 by 3, which is 30. Well, let's just do this for fun. If anyone's still watching, if they're not, it's just for me. But that's why I do most of this stuff anyways, because it has to make sense to me or it makes me crazy. Okay, so let's try that one again. Oh, wonder what I did. I'll find out soon enough. All right, let's make that red. I'm tired of that dark color. Okay, so I have a garden and it's 10 by 3. And I'm adding the same amount to both, which makes x plus 10 and x plus 3. So my area goes from 30 to 60. So x plus 10 times x plus 3 equals 60 because it doubled. X squared plus 10x plus 3x plus 30 equals 60. X squared plus 13x minus 30 equals 0. My sum is 13. My product is 30 negative. Oh, that's why, because it's negative. Ding dong. Sorry, that's me. That was a ding dong. So it's really plus 15 and minus 2. Shoo. Okay, so we have x squared plus 15x minus 2x minus 30. Greatest common factor over here is x. Greatest common factor over here is -2. So I have x minus 2 and x plus 15. So x is either 2 or x is -15. And it can't be negative, so it's 2. Oh, that makes so much more sense. So if x is 2, then the width is 5 and the length is 12. And 5 times 12 equals 30. That's what I did wrong, is I missed my minus sign in there somewhere. Okay, I feel so much better. I hope you do too.